They ate each other, not in a story, not in a novel, in broad daylight on a river island in Siberia in the year 1933, while Soviet officials watched from the shore and wrote reports about it. And then the entire Soviet state buried those reports so deep that the world would not learn the full truth for more than 50 years. This is not a rumor. This is not wartime propaganda. This is one of the most meticulously documented atrocities of the Stalinist era, a horror so complete, so deliberate, and so nakedly human in its depravity that even hardened Soviet bureaucrats were forced to put it in writing. And those writings survived. So before we go any further, ask yourself this. If a government can take 6,000 ordinary people, dump them on a wilderness island with no food, no shelter, no tools, and no way off, and then simply wait, what does that tell us about the system that built it? Because that is exactly what happened at Nazino. And it starts with an idea that sounded, on paper, perfectly reasonable. In the early 1930s, Stalin's Soviet Union was in the grip of a manic, violent transformation. Collectivization was tearing through the countryside. Millions were being displaced. The regime needed labor, enormous quantities of it. Deep in western Siberia, vast territories needed to be cleared, farmed, and settled. The solution, proposed in 1932 by the secret police chief Genrikh Yagoda, was something called special settlements. The idea was to populate Siberia using so-called socially harmful elements, a category so vague it could mean almost anyone. Petty criminals, people without internal passports, workers who were late to their jobs too many times, peasants who had resisted collectivization. In other words, ordinary people. In the spring of 1933, the city of Moscow launched a massive sweep. Police rounded up tens of thousands of people off the streets, from train stations, from markets. Many had committed no real crime at all. They were simply inconvenient. Within days, thousands were loaded into overcrowded train cars without adequate food or water and shipped east into Siberia. The destination was Nazino Island, a narrow strip of land in the middle of the Ob River, approximately 1.3 kilometers long. It had no infrastructure, no barracks, no tools, no food stores, nothing. On the 24th of May, 1933, the first barge arrived, then another, and another. By the end of it, approximately 6,000 people had been deposited on that island and left there. It rained almost immediately. The temperature dropped. People had no shelter. Guards were posted along the riverbanks to prevent escape, armed with orders to shoot anyone who tried to swim across. The first food delivery, a small quantity of flour, arrived days later. People were so desperate that they rushed the flour, and many fell into the river and drowned trying to reach it. Those who got flour had no way to cook it. They mixed it with river water and ate it raw. Dysentery swept through the population almost instantly. Within the first week, people began to die, not in small numbers, in the dozens, then the hundreds. And then, the thing that would make Nazino infamous beyond all the other horrors of the Gulag system, people began to kill and eat each other. Survivors later described scenes that are almost impossible to process. People were murdered for their rations, bodies were mutilated, flesh was cut from the living as well as the dead. Guards reportedly participated or looked away. One local official named Vasily Velichko was so horrified by what he witnessed that he filed a detailed report all the way up the chain of command, documenting the cannibalism, the murders, the complete collapse of any human order on the island. His report reached the highest levels of the Soviet government. It did not stop anything. By the time survivors were finally moved off the island and into work settlements along the river over the following weeks, roughly 4,000 of the original 6,000 people had died. Some estimates are even higher. Death came from starvation, cold, disease, violence, and the complete abandonment by the state that had put them there. Now, if this story is new to you, there is a reason. The Soviet state classified everything related to Nazino almost immediately. The local officials who tried to raise alarms were dismissed or silenced. Velichko's report disappeared into the archives. The island itself became a place that locals knew about only through whispered stories passed between generations. In the Soviet Union, you did not talk about Nazino. Not safely. It was not until the era of glasnost under Gorbachev in the late 1980s that the story began to surface publicly. Journalists and researchers began to access the archives. Survivor testimonies were collected, many from elderly men and women who had never spoken of what they saw to anyone outside their families. The full documentary record was finally published and analyzed in the 1990s and 2000s by historians, including Nicholas Wirth, whose work brought Nazino to international scholarly attention. What makes Nazino so uniquely devastating is not just the scale of the death, though the scale is devastating. It is the documentary proof that this was not an accident. Officials knew there was no infrastructure on that island before the barges arrived. They knew people could not survive there. And the trains came anyway. The barges came anyway. The guards were posted anyway. This is the part that should keep you up at night. Not just the cannibalism, as monstrous as that is, but the fact that a bureaucratic system, run by human beings, decided that 6,000 other human beings were simply not worth keeping alive. They were inconvenient. They were surplus. And so they were deposited on an island and forgotten. If you want to understand how totalitarianism actually functions at its most extreme, not in theory but in practice, Nazino is one of the clearest windows we have. It shows us the endpoint of a system that has removed every check, every accountability, every value placed on individual human life. The island is still there, quiet, forested. Most people who pass it on the Ob River today have no idea what happened there. The bones are still in the ground. This kind of deep, unflinching history matters to you. Subscribe to this channel. We do not flinch from the hard parts of the past because those are exactly the parts we cannot afford to forget. Leave a comment below telling us what you knew about the Gulag system before watching this. And share this video with someone who thinks they already know the darkest chapters of the 20th century. Because Nazino proves that no matter how much we think we know, there is always something history buried deeper.